Today's video, we're going to take another look at the Epson Equity 1E.
We review old technology from games to old PCs, and don't forget the toys. Oh yeah, ancient electronics, we cover it all.
So today's video, I'm going to be looking at another machine that I've already covered quite some time ago. I think I started this channel roughly 5 or 6 years ago, and I think this was one of my earlier videos. Now when I did this video, I probably only had 100 subs, maybe 200, and I think this machine deserves to have a little more eyes on it. So my channel's gotten a little bit bigger these days. Can't claim the production values have increased tremendously, but they're a little bit better. But I think this machine is interesting enough that, and I just think we need to take another look at it. And that said, I also want to encourage you guys to watch some of my older videos. I know that some of them might be a little hard to watch. I think that might be true with most people on YouTube, regardless of the genre, especially if you're big on like video quality and things like that. But there's a lot of good content, not just in my channel, but other people's channels. And I've noticed a lot of people, they'll subscribe to a channel and they don't really check out the backlog all that much. But I want to encourage you all, check out people's backlogs, my channel and other channels too, because there's a lot of interesting older videos out there that I don't think get enough attention. But that said, that's why I'm bringing back some of these machines that maybe we took a look at several years ago, and just take another look at them. So as I said, this machine here is the Epson Equity 1E. So it's an XT class computer from Epson. There's a couple reasons this machine is interesting. When you look at it, it just kind of looks like a standard OEM XT class computer. But there's two cool things about this. One thing is very unique, and the other one isn't quite as unique, but it's still a selling point to this machine. So the first selling point about this specific XT machine is it is really fast for an XT machine. Inside there, originally it was an 8086, but the thing you got to look out for with Turbo XT boards and boards that use 8086, sometimes they'll use the 8086, which I believe is a 16-bit processor, but the motherboard itself and the bus will be 8-bit. So the CPU gets a little bit strangled there. And we see this a lot in some of the later like Macintosh 2s. They'll have 32-bit processors and 16-bit motherboards. I believe that's right, and it strangles the performance of the CPU. So when you get a machine that has the 16-bit CPU and the 16-bit motherboard, especially like the XT class, you can really get some speed out of this thing. And this thing also runs at 10 megahertz. So that's what this little speed button here is. So it can be really fast. Other thing is it's a socketed. So you can replace that 8086 with an NEC V30, and the V30 is sort of it's the 8086 equivalent of the NEC V20, which is a very common upgrade for 8088 machines. So you can make this thing really fast. The other really cool and super unique thing about this machine is, other than a few IBM machines, it is the only computer to have an MCGA video built into it. Other than this machine, there's only a couple sort of lower-end IBM, I believe PS1 machines that have MCGA built in. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's no discrete cards with the chip. It's just a couple IBM machines and this guy here. So like I said earlier, I've already done a video on this, so I'm not going to go super duper maybe into detail all the specifics here, but I will go over everything again. So first off, right here we just have a little power LED light, and as you go over here, there's two buttons. One is the reset and the other is speed. I like how it just says speed. I just think that's a little more intuitive than the turbo button, which sometimes makes it faster, but on some machines it makes it slower. Actually, most machines the turbo button makes it slower from the default speed. So I always thought like the turbo button was a little bit backwards. I like speed. The speed button's just a little more neutral, I guess. So default This runs at 8 megahertz, and then if you hit the speed button, you can boost it up to a full 10 megahertz. And as I said, stock, this machine has an 8086 16-bit CPU with a 16-bit motherboard. I believe also it has 0 wait states, so it's very fast. Right here, one of the weaknesses of this machine is it doesn't have any full 5¼ inch drive bays. It just has these dual drive bays. So right now I have two 720K floppy drives in there. When I originally had this machine, I believe this drive was up here, and then there was a little hard drive right there. But I've changed that a little bit. And then right here is the big old rectangle power button. So let's flip this guy around and take a look at the back. Alright, so here is the back of the machine. Nice little exhaust fan right here, and then right here we just have the standard 3-prong power connector. 1, 2, 3, 4 spots for expansion. We'll open this machine and take a look at those. Obviously we have right now just, it looks like, I don't remember exactly what this sound card is, but right now we just have this sound card installed in there. Doesn't look like anything else. Let's take a look at the other things before we look at the video. Serial port, parallel port. That's the larger style of serial port, but you can get an adapter if you want to use a serial mouse. And then we have two PS2 ports for mouse and keyboard. Very convenient. You don't see PS2 ports very often on XT class machines, so that's very nice that you can just plug in well, most things USB now, but a fairly modern and easy to find keyboard, and even just an optical, like a laser mouse into this thing. And I've done it and it works just fine. That's really nice and really convenient. So you can see this machine took a lot of cues from the IBM PS2 line of computers by using these ports that IBM was trying to and did make standardize for computer keyboard and mice connectors at the time. So right here we have the built-in video, and this connector is pretty standard. So it is missing the one little secure thing right there. It fell out, but this works, and this is MCGA. Now, I am not a technical guru. I have said that before. I don't have any formal schooling on this stuff. This is just my hobby. Just consider me just some guy on the internet. I'm not a professional. So I can't really tell you all the technical things about MCGA, but basically it's just kind of a budget version of VGA. I believe it came out about the same time as VGA, and it was kind of more of a budget-oriented version of that. Now, you guys can correct me in the comments. There was never any discrete video cards that had the chip on it. It was only available on a couple lower-end IBM machines at the time, and this Epson machine. Now, I've also been told there was another model of Epson computer that this was available on, but I did some research on that, and I believe that's just the Latin American renaming of this machine when it was sold in Central and South America. So I don't think there's actually two models of the Epson computers with the MCGA. I believe it's the same computer, just a different region. It was named slightly differently. So MCGA, how is it different from VGA? Well, they both do pretty much the same resolutions and 256 color mode. Now, it does not do like SVGA and all the higher-ups, but basically it'll do all your basic VGA modes at the time, early VGA modes. The one thing it doesn't do VGA-wise is if a game or a program kind of used tweaks, like VGA tricks or tweaks, to get maybe better performance or something like that, it couldn't do that. So if a game used that, it would not run on MCGA. Other than that, as far as I know, VGA-wise, it's pretty much exactly the same. Like VGA, it is backwards compatible with CGA. I don't know if it's register compatible. It might have better compatibility with CGA than VGA does, but don't quote me on that. But the really, really big minus with MCGA is it is not backwards compatible with EGA. So you cannot do EGA at all, whereas true VGA will do VGA, EGA, and CGA. There may be some issues and minor compatibility issues, especially with CGA, but MCGA will not do EGA at all. And that's kind of a problem because the machines that it was used in, like this one and some of those more budgety IBM machines, those machines kind of excel very well at EGA games. So like this machine, even for an XT class computer, it's not quite fast enough for VGA. Early, some VGA stuff it can do. But for serious VGA gaming on this thing, it's just not powerful enough. But it is powerful enough for all those great EGA titles, or at least the bulk of them. Now, of course, you have these expansion slots, and you can put in a VGA card. And that's what I intend to do here. I did it in the past. I have a couple ideas of what I would want to put in here. I haven't really decided if I just want to put the fastest VGA card I can in here or something it's a little more interesting and compatible. But again, let me know what you guys think in the comments about that and about MCGA in general, because I don't know a ton about it. It's kind of weird in my opinion, but let me know what you guys think. Okay, so let's open this guy up and take a look inside. Alright, let's take a look at the inside here. Now, I did have 2 expansion cards, which I did remove. We'll look at those in a minute. But we have 4 of those slots, so these are 8-bit ISA slots. Even though it's a 16-bit processor and presumably board, these are still 8-bit slots. So if you look, it's pretty small board. So, I mean, this is an XT board, but I don't know exactly when this came out. Probably late 80s or early 90s, probably late 80s, but it's pretty integrated here. I know this is our RAM here, so we have the full 640K of RAM right there. Here's our battery, big old lithium battery. This is, as far as I know, the original. It hasn't leaked. I should probably remove that, but I don't know. What do you guys think? I don't think it holds its charge, so it is kind of useless, but it hasn't leaked yet. Here's our floppy cable that is connected there. It looks like there was provision for onboard IDE as well, but not on this machine. I could take this off, but I'm not going to. Just some chip. I believe this is like an InMost chip. I'm not sure what that is. I don't know where the MCGA chip is. Like I said, I'm not like a technical guy on these. I just play a lot of games and do YouTube videos. So I don't know which of these chips may be the MCGA. This is Epson. Oh, this is an Epson. This is that one back here. That's the InMost chip. These might be ROM chips. Here, this is a Toshiba. Tried to look up that number. Still have no idea what that chip does. And then right here we have our CPU and our math coprocessor. So I did replace the 8086 with an NEC V30. So like I said earlier, this is sort of the 8086 version of the NEC V20. So it just gives it a nice little speed boost. I believe there's some 286 instruction sets in here, so it can do a little bit more, but it's 100% compatible, or at least 99% compatible, just like the NEC V20, and it does give you a nice little speed boost. So the thing is, with this V30 and the 16-bit motherboard, this machine should be pretty much like a low-end 286 as far as speed goes. So we're going to do some benchmarkings. We're going to use programs like Mips, and I have some other machines around the class of this machine. We're going to compare it, but this should be equivalent to like a 6 megahertz 286-ish, maybe even a little faster. I don't know. I'm curious on that. But yeah, this is I believe this is rated for 10 megahertz, our math coprocessor here. And that's about it. Here's the power supply here, pretty standard. It's just like an AT power connector, although it is like one, it's not split into two. But I think that's just a physical thing. It should be the same otherwise. But that should be about it. So let's take a quick look at the cards. The two cards that I did have in here. I want to quickly also point out that it does have a actual speaker cone in here. It's not just a piezo speaker, it's an actual PC speaker. And on the case, I probably mentioned this in the first video I did on this machine, but there's some permanent marker on here. Washington County, but I believe it's Washington County, Virginia. It says Virginia, I believe that says school. So this was probably in a school, and then there's probably just some kind of internal inventory number. But it looks like this was in some kind of school in Washington County, Virginia. So this is the sound card I had installed. This is a Sound Blaster. I believe this is a Sound Blaster 1.5. It's a CT1320C. 1990. I believe this card came out in '89. I think this is a good match for the XT. Just because it's kind of an early Sound Blaster. I don't know. It just felt like a good match. This one has been upgraded with the CMS chips, so it can do Sound Blaster as well as the Creative Music System, and of course ad lib. So I've gone over this card in other machines before, so I won't go into it very deep here. But I think this is a pretty good match for this build. So yeah, there should be, you know, it's an early sound card for a machine that's only really going to be playing early games. Probably a lot of EGA titles, as I think is what this Epson excels at. So I think this fits nicely. And the other thing I had is one of these little guys. You know, usually I'm kind of a purist. I like to have real drives in there, but I don't know. I have a couple of these. I like to use these sometimes. This one specifically on eBay, it comes with these 64 megabyte cards that actually have DOS 6.22 installed on them. These are great. They're pretty plug and play. So I could just plug this in the machine and it just boots up to DOS 6.22. I'm not real concerned about being period correct with this build in particular. So yeah, I don't mind using this guy in there. So that leaves us actually with two slots. So we've got this and the sound card. Now one of those slots is going to be filled up with a VGA card, yet to be determined VGA card. And then I have one more slot. I might be able to benefit with some like an extra memory, but I think I'm out of. I actually think I'm out of the memory, like extra, like Intel above boards. So I don't know. I'll probably just leave it blank for now. But all right, so let's get this guy back together. Let's just do some benchmarks. Let's see if I can get it running with the built-in MCGA. Play around with that a little bit. In the original video, I don't think I actually showed this machine running like gameplay, so maybe we'll do a little bit of that. Okay, so before we look at games, I just wanted to kind of get a general look as well as we can about the speed of this machine. So it was a little bit more limited with benchmarking than I am with my usual videos, since a lot of the benchmarks I use generally require like a 386 or higher, so I didn't have quite all of the benchmarks available to me, but we tried out a few meant for older machines, and these are the results we got. First we're going to look at Check It 2.0. It has a built-in benchmark with that program. All of these machines had the ATI Mach 8 VGA card installed when I did the benchmarks, just for consistency, although I don't think the video card or the video you have running has anything to do. I believe these purely bench the CPU, but just for the sake of consistency, same video card in all of them. So we looked at a wide range of sort of similar XT, AT, PC class machines. So I looked at a regular 8088 machine running at the stock 4.77 megahertz as well as the 10 megahertz turbo. We looked at this machine in its 8 megahertz mode and the turbo mode at 10 megahertz with the NEC V30. Looked at the 7.17 megahertz 286 accelerator card, the tiny turbo that I had installed in my other Turbo XT. And then I kind of just looked at a base IBM AT running at 8 megahertz with a 286. So looking at this chart here, it's kind of like what you would think. So you've got the Turbo XT with the 8088 both 4.77 megahertz and the 10 megahertz mode. They're at the bottom. Following that up is the NEC V30, the Epson Equity at 8 megahertz. Kind of actually a big jump between the 10 megahertz 8088 and the 8 megahertz NEC V30. The V30 is quite a bit more powerful than the 8088 at 10 megahertz. Actually, the 8 megahertz NEC V30 is, according to this test, barely behind the 7.17 megahertz 286 tiny turbo accelerator. So it's about where I was thinking, at about a 7 or 6 megahertz 286. And then we have the 10 megahertz NEC V30, and it's, according to this, it's quite it's measurably faster than the 286 tiny turbo. And then we have the 8 megahertz IBM AT 286, which it is predictably the fastest of them all in this test. But with Check It 2.0 benchmark, I'm surprised how close that 10 megahertz NEC V30 is getting to a IBM AT at 8 megahertz. So far impressive. I'm impressed with the NEC V30 in this machine. So let's move on and look at our next benchmark. Alright, so the next benchmark we're going to look at here is Mips, and with Mips we're comparing all of these machines and their CPUs to a 8 megahertz IBM AT with 286. So since we're directly comparing all of these to the IBM AT, it's not on the chart here, but I have replaced it with a 9.56 megahertz 101,000 RL HD. And that has an 8086. So looking at these numbers, they can be interpreted as power compared to the IBM AT. So for instance, here we'll start here at the bottom. We have the 4.77 megahertz 8088, so standard 8088 machine. It's running at about a quarter of the power of the IBM AT, so 0.24. It's about 24% of the power of an IBM AT. Kicking in that 10 megahertz turbo, so we got 10 megahertz 8088. Pretty impressive. It's actually running at about half the speed, or half the power of an 8 megahertz IBM AT, so 0.51. The Tandy actually isn't doing too much better, even though it's using an 8086. Slightly slower, at least according to stuff like Check It. Check It gives me, with the XT, it actually says the CPU is running at 10 megahertz. With the Tandy, it tells me it's running at 9.56 megahertz. So I just put the speed that it tells me, but it's slightly faster. I don't know if the Tandy, the motherboard in the Tandy 1000 RL it might just be an 8 megahertz or an 8-bit motherboard, and the 8086 is 16-bit, but it's about the same speed, but it's not really running much faster than that 8088. So, and then following that up is our 8 megahertz Epson Equity NEC V30 based, and it's running about 63% of an IBM AT, so that's pretty impressive. And then following that is the Epson Equity with the NEC V30 at 10 megahertz, and again it's running at a pretty impressive almost 80% of the power of an IBM AT. So yeah, I think our initial estimates of its speed and power is probably around a 6 megahertz 286. So yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate estimate if we want to compare it. And then after that we have the 7.17 megahertz 286 tiny turbo accelerator that was installed in my Turbo XT machine, and it's running at about almost 90% of the speed of an 8 megahertz AT. So no big surprises here. This is about what I expected. Even saying that, though, I am still impressed with the power of this Epson Equity with the NEC V30. It's pretty powerful for an XT class machine, so I have to say I am impressed with that. So moving on. Alright, we're going to look at landmark system speed test here. Pretty common benchmark back in the day. Keep in mind this is running with the MCGA video, and we are running at the 10 megahertz turbo. Yeah, this gives us a speed rating of about a 7 megahertz AT computer with a 15 megahertz 287. These were always kind of weird how Landmark did the benchmarking and the speed comparisons, but it's about confirming what we thought a 6 or 7 megahertz AT speed according to Landmark 2.0. So let's take a look at Landmark Speed Test 6.0 and see if it gives us anything different. Okay, so 6.0 gives us a rating of a 9 megahertz AT, so it thinks it's even faster than a standard IBM AT, and a FPU speed of 11 megahertz for the 287. I don't know how much value some of these tests have. This one's kind of weird. At least it gets the video right this time. Instead of CGA, it does recognize its MCGA. Although in 2.0, the clock speed, it was saying it was like 9 point something, and now it kind of at least gives us a correct speed of 10 megahertz. So again, I don't know how much value these benchmarks have, but they're still kind of interesting to look at. And the first game we're going to look at here is Dexter from 1987. This game does have an MCGA mode, which is running here. And yeah, it runs fine as you would expect it to. It looks okay. Again, unfortunately with this game, when you do run it in anything not on a Tandy, you have to deal with the terrible PC speaker sound, and this game does have pretty bad PC speaker sound. Thankfully, I don't have that recorded or hooked up to record, so you were spared from hearing the PC speaker soundtrack from this game. But yeah, it looks fine, it plays fine on this machine. And here's Prince of Persia from 1989, running in 256 color VGA mode on the MCGA video adapter. Now, I tried to run Iron Man Super Off-Road Racer, but unfortunately it locked up whenever I tried VGA mode. I didn't try CGA mode, but VGA mode locked up. I don't think it uses a higher resolution VGA mode, but maybe it uses some kind of trick that the MCGA adapter couldn't handle. But yeah, it did not work. It did this too when I tried EGA mode, but I fully knew that the adapter doesn't support EGA. Now here is the original Leisure Suit Larry. Obviously this is not the later VGA remake, this is the original. And it does appear that the original does support an MCGA mode. As you can see here, it very much it looks like EGA. It's one of those games that can kind of fall back into something that looks like an EGA mode. So yeah, the original Leisure Suit Larry worked perfectly fine with the Epson Equity 1E in or on the MCGA adapter. And of course I wanted to test a newer game. Here we have Planet X3, and it is running in 256 color VGA mode on the MCGA adapter. And this game on this machine looks great, and it also runs great too. Next, I wanted to look at compatibility, because through my research I found that MCGA should be 100% compatible with CGA. So what you're looking at right here is Digger. Now this game is notorious for displaying incorrectly on almost all VGA cards. It will end up looking like this, which is kind of a unplayable mess. So let's hook the Epson Equity up to a monitor via the MCGA output, and let's see what we get. Alright, so what we're looking at here is Digger, same exact game, but this time it's not outputting from a VGA card. It is outputting from the MCGA output on the Epson Equity, and it looks good. I mean, it's playing a little fast, but that's the CPU, and this machine's a little bit faster than this game requires. But like the colors are good, it looks normal, plays normal. So yeah, that's a win for MCGA here. It looks like it's playing Digger just fine. So the next game I want to take a look at is Starquake. Now this game, it's kind of thing that it does, it changes CGA palettes as you play the game and you go through different screens. Now, when you play this game on most VGA cards, it will just stick with one CGA color palette. It will not switch to different ones. So the test here is to see if the MCGA from the Epson Equity will actually change different palette modes in CGA as it's supposed to. And as we can see here, it does appear that it is changing palette modes and color intensities as it's supposed to. So yeah, this is another win for MCGA. This is another one of those games that's real tricky for most VGA cards to do this palette swapping and color intensity changing. So yeah, that's another big win for MCGA. So it appears that MCGA is either 100% compatible with CGA or extremely compatible, but it does appear to be, I would say, 100% compatible. And that was our second look at the Epson Equity 1E, and I quite like this little machine. It is quite small. I like how, you know, you've got your speed button there. You can really hot rod this guy, as we have seen. I mean, I like that the 8086 is socketed. I just like it. I think it's a solid machine overall, if you're looking for something from that era. The MCGA is unique. Like we've said before, this is the only non-IBM machine that came out that ever had MCGA. Now, whether you like that or not, or if you think that's a big benefit or whatever, that's irrelevant. Just the fact is, it is a unique feature to this machine. So if you like weird, unique electronics, that is something very unique about this machine. So overall, yes, I do like the Epson Equity 1E. I think it is a really good choice for a very an early mid-80s machine. Now, originally this video was going to be quite a bit longer because there's one question I wanted to ask about this machine, since it does have that MCGA built in. Is it worth throwing in an 8-bit or a 16-bit VGA card that works in an 8-bit slot, or even is it worth throwing in an EGA card over the built-in MCGA? But as I was doing these tests and compiling this information, it kind of turned into its own video. And I felt that that information would do better as its own video, especially since it pertained to one particular video card, you know, rather than having it kind of buried at the end of this video. Considering that, that's going to be its own video about, more or less about a specific VGA card. But I think with all the testing I did, I can still answer the question, are you okay with this machine as it is, or should you upgrade to a VGA card? So first, let's talk about the MCGA built in here. Now, MCGA was originally marketed as kind of a cheaper version of VGA. So right there, you kind of get the feeling that it's cut down. And it kind of is. It can't do the higher resolution VGA or obviously SVGA. It's basically 256 color VGA mode. If the game uses any kind of weird VGA tricks, it's not going to be able to display the game correctly. I would say the biggest flaw with MCGA, though, especially in a machine of this age, is its inability to do EGA. Because, in my opinion, the CPU power, whether you've upgraded it to an NEC or you've stuck with the 8086, I would still say this machine accelerates most of all with EGA era, EGA games, and that era of PC gaming. And the fact that MCGA doesn't support EGA is a bit of a problem. Now, I was impressed with the support for MCGA. A lot of those EGA games directly support MCGA, and it will fall back on a video mode that more or less lines up with EGA. I think that's kind of what we saw with Leisure Suit Larry. That game looked fine. It does have MCGA mode that supports MCGA, but there are a number of EGA games that just will not work with the built-in video. Now, looking at Moby Games, I was quite impressed with MCGA support. I believe they listed over 600 games that supported MCGA. Now, I don't know if those are games that officially directly support MCGA, or maybe they were just also throwing in 256 color VGA games, which will work with MCGA, even if it's not explicitly stated as being MCGA compatible. But yeah, I think you're okay. I mean, as far as I could tell, MCGA looks to be pretty much 100% CGA compatible. I mean, the problem with that is not a lot of people get into retro computing to play CGA games. CGA games is like a niche within a niche. You know, it's very ancient even to retro PC gamers, so that's usually not a priority to most people. I would also say this machine's a little too fast for CGA stuff, but you know, I just don't think that's the priority of most vintage computer enthusiasts. So I don't really think the 100% CGA compatibility is a selling point for this machine. It is cool it can do some of that early VGA stuff, but I also think the CPU is a bottleneck, even upgraded with the NEC. It's a bottleneck. You're just not going to be able to play a lot of that like later, more intensive VGA stuff, you know, maybe as well as you would in a faster machine. So, you know, all that said, I would recommend upgrading to a VGA card if it's cheap enough for you and convenient for you. You can still find, this is the D version, but you can still find these Trinet cards, like the 8900 series, fairly cheap. And these are 16-bit. Some of these auto-configure. This one you have to set jumpers a certain way. But this will work in an 8-bit slot as a VGA card. So that's an option. And I don't know, I just think you're maybe a little bit better off with a VGA card. With a true VGA card installed in here. You're going to lose a little bit of compatibility with CGA games. But as I said, I don't think CGA is going to be a priority for most of you guys out there. It's almost 100% compatible with EGA games, so you're going to be able to play pretty much all of your EGA titles. And you're still going to get all the support for VGA, plus more. Now again, you're probably not going to be able to play a lot of the higher resolution VGA titles just because of the bottleneck of the CPU and the architecture, but it kind of just expands your options there. So I think the pluses in this machine of throwing in a VGA card like this one outweighs the minuses you'll get, and the pluses you would get sticking with the MCGA. So yes, I would recommend installing a VGA card in this machine. If this is something you're going to be using a lot, and you can get yourself a VGA card cheaply or conveniently. So yeah, thank you for watching the video. I'm glad we got to take a second look at this machine. I've said on this channel before, I kind of have a little bit of limited space, so some of those early videos I did, I don't have those machines anymore. Whether I sold them or gave them away, I just don't have a lot of those setups anymore. But this one I did hold on to just because it is such a unique and kind of a cool PC that I like. So I'm glad I got to do a second look video on this guy here. But thank you for watching. Again, I love comments, so let me know what you think in the comments section. I am interested in MCGA. If any of you out there that are more, technically inclined and have something you want to add about MCGA in general, please put it in the comments. I'd certainly be interested in learning more, or just any comments about this machine in general. So, again, thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.